one of the best maxims of critical thinking is to, when you're reading something or encountering something, why is it written? Why does it exist? It took time to write that. Why did that person do that?
We live increasingly atomised lives, we live increasingly individualistic lives where we don't know our neighbours and we're not connected to our communities. And that means that our kind of shared fundamental basis of understanding of our society and our community and our world is not nearly as strong as it was previously. And that makes it very hard for people to even begin to have a political disagreement.
We are in a crisis moment. It's obvious there's all this fake news out there, but do we really know how to identify it?
I often think that fake news, as it gets called, is one of these things that's easier to define about what it's not rather than what it is. Fake news is not news that you disagree with. Fake news is not news that is wrong, though that's obviously a problem in and of itself. Fake news is deliberate misinformation designed to coerce or change or manipulate opinion for some sort of advantage, be that political, be that financial, be that societal. Fake news is deliberate misinformation. And that's not to suggest that propaganda hasn't always existed. Propaganda has existed for hundreds, for thousands of years. But the speed at which misinformation can be spread, the speed at which misinformation can be multiplied and then find its way into sort of mainstream legitimate channels is extraordinary. And the way misinformation can be presented in a way that looks just like legitimate information is hugely problematic.
It's really a crime. It's a social and ethical crime, because if people don't know what sort of the reality is, we don't know what we're doing. This is like really central to our self-conception, that we are agents, free agents, we know what we're doing. And problem of fake news is really kind of cutting against that ideal.
Look, my responsibility is towards truth, and is towards finding the best version and the closest version thereof of the truth, and we can get into debates around is there such a thing as an objective truth. And of course everybody has a position and brings a level of subjectivity. You can't ever escape your own position as a reporter, but you can get closer to truth and you can get pretty close, and there are facts, there are objective, observable facts in the world, and they need to be reported. And I think that's where your fundamental role lies, is getting as close as you can with the resources and the time and the ability you have to the fundamental truth.
You can only do so much. You just got to try and know your sources, think about things a bit more deeply than the headline. When that's all you get and all you're going to be looking at, try and step back from that and think, oh, how likely is that to be true, or how authentic is that source actually going to be?
I think one thing about a lot of the, older kinds, traditional fake news, propaganda, is that it was always deliberate. And I think one thing that's a little scary about the social media stuff is that it's not deliberate always, but it is just as pernicious.
What we see in our Facebook news feeds and algorithms, and this kind of atomisation of news, that the news you get in your Twitter feed and your Facebook post, is getting increasingly more and more refined and more directed specifically to you. News that fits your preconceived ideas of the world being repeated back to you and amplified back to you, that enables fake news to find an audience and to fall on fertile ground, but basically where it's amplified, where it's picked up, where it's repeated, and that enables it. The old Winston Churchill quote, "The liar's halfway around the world before the truth has had a chance to get its boots on."
Yeah, I think ordinary people are pretty fine with being able to critically engage with the news, like most people like today. The rates of trust people have with their news organisations are the lowest rate that they've ever been.
I personally think it's a shame that we can't trust, the major news outlets, or we don't anymore. Because I do think there is a place for allocating that trust in another body to some extent.
Look, perhaps I have an overly idealistic view of journalism. I've watched All the President's Men a little too often. But I think journalism is fundamental to a functioning democracy. Democratic institutions need to be held to account. There needs to be, a fourth estate. Communities need to know what their governments are doing with their money and in their name, and that's the role of journalism. That's its most fundamental and most important role. I still think that is as vital as it's ever been, if not more important than it's ever been. And I think journalism, while it's going through extraordinary change, remains kind of central to a functioning democracy.
You know, the responsibility does, unfortunately, it falls on the reader.
Probably don't take these articles at face value, maybe do a bit of your own digging instead.
Being responsible as an audience member means having a critical eye. There are elements of truth, elements of misinformation as well, what is omitted, what connections are not drawn.
It is harder now for audiences to see the hidden biases and the hidden agendas that exist, but I think the responsibility remains on audiences to understand where their news is coming from and to read critically and to read sceptically. You don't need to be cynical, but you can be sceptical.
I honestly think the only way forward is through real interaction, and I do think people need to put down their phones and talk to the people in front of them. I do think that there's something really important about flesh and blood, face-to-face interaction with real people.